Okay guys, so today we're going to learn about sequence diagram. So I will again refer back to this book, Teach Yourself UML 24 Hours, because this is having a much more simple explanation than what you can see from the UCSC slides. So I'll follow with this. Okay, so we are going to learn about sequence diagram. Again, I'm going to do only part of it today. The remaining part I will break this into two sessions, another session as well, because we have a lot of content to cover. Okay, so in the last class we discussed about state diagrams. State diagrams, again, we know that state diagrams were describing the dynamic behavior of a system or dynamic behavior of a single object, isn't it? So that's the recalling here given. The state diagrams you learned about in the last hour zoom in on a single object. They show the changes an object goes through. Similarly, now in sequence diagram, rather than talking about a single object, we try to see the dynamic behavior of many objects over time, right? So we'll be talking about this concept called scenarios. You remember in use case, when we were learning use cases, when we were designing use case diagram, we discussed about use cases. So each use case we have different scenarios, right? When, for example, if you want to have interaction with an ATM machine that has a success scenario. So success scenario means you go to the ATM machine, you insert the card, you type in the PIN number correctly, and sufficient balance is there. You type in the amount and you get the amount. So this is success scenario. There could be another scenario where you type the PIN number, everything correctly, but insufficient balance is there. So that is another scenario. Like that, you can come up with many scenarios in that simple interaction. So sequence diagram tries to cover these different scenarios. And how do we show it over orderly manner, like what we do in a particular order. Okay, so the state diagrams you learned about in the last hour zoom in on a single object. They show the changes an object goes through. The UML enables you to expand your field of view and show how an object interacts with other objects. In this expanded field of view, you will include an important dimension, time. So here, most importantly, we are trying to introduce time in trying to express these scenarios. So the key idea here is that interactions among objects take place in a specified sequence. So keep that in mind. And the sequence takes time to go from beginning to end. When you create a system, you specify the sequence and you use the UML sequence diagram to show that, right? So simply, what is a sequence diagram? Consists of objects represented in the usual way as named rectangles with the name underlined. Messages represented as solid line arrows and time represented as a vertical progression, right? We'll see as we see the example, we'll know. So the important point is we will show objects just like, remember in object diagrams, we just draw a rectangle and then put a colon and we put a colon and the class name or the object name, right? Which is called an anonymous object. Similarly, if you put a name in front of it, we call it is a named object. So we simply represent it in a rectangle, and whatever messages we need to show, we show it as solid line arrows, and then we'll show time in a vertical progression. Vertical means top to bottom manner. Okay, so the objects. The objects are laid out near the top of the diagram from left to right. They are arranged in any order that simplifies the diagram. Okay, so what we do is we basically put the objects. So if you can see this white space here, we normally show the objects in this way. Like for example, one object here, another object here. Like that you can keep on going, creating another object, right? So objects will be represented, say this is object 1, right? So you can give the name here like that, anonymous object 2, right? So and so forth. So we keep on going with the drawing it in this direction, right? So this is going to show the number of objects that are going to interact with the sequence diagram. I mean in the system. Similarly, this way we show the sequence. That is the vertical way we show the sequence. Okay. So that's what this is. The objects are laid out near the top of the diagram from left to right. They are arranged in any order that simplifies the diagram. So here there is no particular order which one should come first, second, like that. There is no order like that. But the most number of interactions that are going to happen at the beginning, you will put those two objects next to each other. Then you will put the next one to the other side. So in this way, it will be drawn. Extending downward from each object is a dashed line called the object's lifeline. Along the lifeline is a narrow rectangle called an activation. Right. So if you look at this here, I have drawn it here also. So this is how you put an object, as you know, we have learned in object diagram. Same thing we introduce in a sequence as well. This is called anonymous object. We give the object name, colon, underline. So that is the object. Then you have the dashed line called the lifeline. Lifeline means how long that object is going to interact in the system or function in that system. Activation bar is a rectangle area drawn along the lifeline, which indicates basically at this given point of time this is active, something like that. This particular object is active along this particular period of time. So when we say that is the object that is active at that time, we show it in a rectangle. So it's simply a lifeline again, but it shows the ownership. At that moment of time, this is the person currently active, something like that. So if you can just take a note of this this whole thing here, which we discussed here, that will be worthwhile as a short note. Right, okay. Just keeping this in mind is important, like as we try to understand the concepts further. Okay, let me go back. So extending downward from each object is a dashed line called the object's lifeline, this one. Along the lifeline is a narrow rectangle called an activation. The activation represents an execution of an operation the object carries out. The length of the rectangle signifies the activation's duration. So basically how long this is going to work and how long that is the active is what is shown in this rectangular bar, or called the activation bar. Duration and time in general are represented in a rough ordinal way. This means that each dash in a lifeline usually doesn't stand for a specific unit of time, but is intended to give a general sense of duration. Right. So the dash is not relevant actually. I mean, you can draw it however long you want. That doesn't show the duration actually. Generally, we show the duration with the activation bar. So we can see that here. So with that, we introduce the basic structure, I mean basic fundamental structure of what comes in a sequence diagram, right? Then we move on to messages. How do we pass messages from one object to the other, right? There are some small concepts here. A message that goes from one object to another goes from one object's lifeline to another object's lifeline. An object can also send a message to itself, that is from its lifeline back to its own lifeline. Right? So how do we understand that? Let me go back to the board here. So basically, there are three types of messages, right? One is you can send a message which is a filled arrowhead. So as I draw this arrow mark, you can see from one lifeline to the another object's lifeline, we have this type of message is called a it's called a synchronous message. Right. Let me change the color of it. It's called synchronous message. Okay, meaning that this object 1, which is sending a information or calling a message, calling a function in object 2, expecting a response. It is expecting a response. That means when you say it's a filled arrowhead, you are expecting object 2 to send back a response back. So normally the responses are not shown directly. I mean, in UML you can, that is optional. You don't have to always indicate a return message, but in case you still need to indicate a return message, we indicate it back with a dashed arrow, which is an open arrowhead. Open arrowhead means it is not dashed. Notice here I have dashed it here. This is just open. So here I could say this is a return message. Right, so I can call this particular thing as a return message. Okay, there's a third type of arrow where it is one way. So one way message is indicated just like the return message. Let's say object 1 wants to send a message to this one. It is a full arrow with an open head. So this one is called asynchronous message. We call this asynchronous message. Meaning, synchronous means object 1 wants to synchronize or mix with object 2, or it is expecting a response from object 2. That is why we call it synchronous. So this is how you should. So in your problem domain, you will also have certain cases where one object is calling the function of the other object and then expecting a return. In that case, you will indicate those kind of function calls, method calls with the dashed arrow. Return message is simply a return message, so it could be a return value or some, maybe sometimes, mostly it is going to return some values. So like it could be an indicator, it could be some integers or whatever that is coming back from that. Apart from that, if you are sending a one-way message, let's say sometimes after some time along this timeline in this third object, depending on whatever you have drawn in your scenario, let's say this could be again sending a one-way message back like this. So the arrows don't have to be only from left to right. It can be the other way around as well. So again, keep the concepts in mind. So asynchronous message is one way, right? Maybe you should put into bracket like one way. Okay, note that down. Is this clear? So I'll be going through the notes. I'll be reading through the notes. But before that, is this clear? Okay. Others? Okay, good. Right. UML represents a message as an arrow that starts at one lifeline and ends at another. The shape of the arrowhead shows what type of message it is. In the older UML 1.x, 3 arrowhead shapes were available, but now UML 2.0 has eliminated one of those shapes. And according to the person who is writing this, he is saying the reason why they have removed one is to avoid confusion. Right. I'll explain the messages and then show you what UML 2.0 has eliminated. Okay, we don't have to worry about that. So in the messages we discussed, one type of message is a call. This is a request from the object sending the message to the object receiving the message. The request is for the receiver to carry out one of its, that is the receiver's operations. Usually this entails the sender waiting for the receiver to carry out that operation. Because the sender waits for the receiver, that is, syncs up with the receiver, this message is also referred to as synchronous. So as I discussed here, this first part, object 1, when you are sending a message here means you are calling a function that is defining object 2, right? So that is what we do it here, and then this has to return something. This object 2 is, so object 1 is expecting a response. That is what they're saying. Because the sender waits for the receiver, and this message is called synchronous. So UML signifies this message type with a filled arrowhead at the end of a solid line. It's typically the case that a call involves a return message from the receiver. All the modelers often omit the symbol for the return message. The symbol for the return message is an open stick arrowhead with a dashed line. Open stick means, as I told here, this is called open stick dashed line. That is how we show the return message. So as we saw here, so this is synchronous calls. This is the return message. Right. Another kind of message is asynchronous. With this one, the sender transfer control to the receiver and doesn't wait for the operation to complete. The symbol for this message is an open stick arrowhead, as we saw in the example. Right? So this is called open stick. Right. Moving on, I'll skip these small additional notes. They're just comparing UML 1.x with the UML 2.0. So I'll just leave it for your reference. The diagram represents time in the vertical direction. Time starts at the top and progresses toward the bottom. A message that's closer to the top occurs earlier in time than a message that's closer to the bottom. So as I told, when we are drawing, so this is how it is going to indicate. So when we put this one, so this is number 1, then this might be the number 2 interaction, this might be number 3. So like that, this is how time is indicated, right? Time is indicated in this manner, top to bottom. That is how you represent time in a objective. So we basically don't give numbers or anything for the messages. The way we draw the arrow symbols and all will give a good indicator that this is how the interactions are going to happen in a sequence order in that particular system. Right. So a message that is closer to the top occurs earlier in time than a message that's closer to the bottom. Thus, the sequence diagram is two-dimensional. The left to right dimension is the layout of the objects, and the top to bottom dimension shows the passage of time. So, as I discussed here, this is showing time. This way, we show the layout, the ordering of the objects, layout of the objects, right? So maybe you can take a small note of this quickly if you haven't. So we show things over time here, and this is the arrangement of the different objects that are part of your system. Then easily looking at this sequence diagram, we can see how the objects are interacting and in what order. So that is the whole objective. So it shows a dynamic arrangement of what is happening in the system. Now, layout in the sense, what I was telling is the arrangement of the objects. So the arrangement of the objects happen left to right. We start from the left point and keep on going in this direction, right? We keep on going on the left to right direction is like first object, second object, next object. Like that, we keep on going in the that direction. And so that is the horizontal way of arranging the objects, and we call it the layout of the objects. How we place the objects in our space, in our sequence diagram. Top to bottom, we show the lifeline as we discussed. I mean, what is the order it is going to work. So it shows the timely interaction from in the vertical space. Horizontal space, we show the arrangement of the objects. I mean, there's nothing very complicated here, so that you don't have to memorize what is layout and those things. Just when you're starting to draw a sequence diagram, you can't have. So basically, why I was explaining that is you can't have objects somewhere drawing like this, and then say you want to send a message like this. No, that is not allowed. This is not allowed. This is also not allowed, right? So layout should be, all the objects should be placed at the top, left to right. That is the thing I wanted to highlight. Clear? Okay, so let's move on. So the sequence diagram is two-dimensional. Left to right dimension is the layout of the objects, and top to bottom dimension shows the passage of time. Okay, figure 9.4 shows the essential symbol set of the sequence diagram with the symbols working together. Okay, another point I forgot to mention is an object can also send a message to itself, something like this. It could be a synchronous message, or it can be a asynchronous message. You can even indicate it like this. So this is how you show a message, an object calling itself. That you put a kind of a curved arrow calling it to itself. So within this time, this is calling this, right? So that is there. Okay. The objects are laid out across the top. Each object's lifeline is a dashed line extending downward from the object. A solid line with an arrowhead connects one lifeline to another and represents a message from one object to another. So to put all things together, as we discussed, as I demonstrated, you can see how we show that. Now, if you look at this one, name 1, name 2. So these are anonymous objects, right? Why I call it anonymous? because before this colon I haven't given any instance name. Like for example, the class is name1, class is name2. So that's why we just give it with colon name1, colon name2. Okay, so two objects are there. You can see the lifeline is starting here. At this point of time, at the beginning, name1 is the main person activated. So he is starting his operations, and at some point he is starting to call the second object. So here we can give the function name and all. Here they haven't shown it, just for demonstration purpose. Then after this calls, this takes some time to process this information or whatever the message that has come. It is to show that this is going to take some time. We draw it a little further like this. Again, I'm telling there is no limit of how long you want to draw this. It's better to keep it a little short, but drawing that will indicate that this is going to take some time to do. Then it is sending a message back to name1. Then after that, some time is taken and name1 is trying to call itself, right? So in order to bring this important UML tool to life, we'll apply it to some examples. So these are all concepts we learned. Now let's try to see a real world scenario, real case scenario where we can start drawing sequence diagram. So as we do so, you'll have the opportunity to work with some object-oriented concepts that form the basis for sequence diagram. I'll also be going back into classes, so it might seem that I'm regressing. I'm not. Okay. So basically, we are going to also revisit. As we discuss sequence diagram, we'll revisit some of the knowledge we learned under class diagram, because everything is coming from there. Right. Now let's take this very good example that you have a car and you have a remote and car keys. Right. So with the car key, what we do, basically it's not remote. We have the car and the car key. So through the key, we want to lock the car, unlock the car, maybe open the trunk. Trunk means it could be the, we say the back side of the rear side of the vehicle, right? Where we open and put things inside. So different things will be there in a car, in a vehicle. So you might be familiar with the kind of car key that allows you to remotely lock and unlock a car. That we have this button type of keys, So it also lets you open the car's trunk. If you have one of these keys, you know what happens when you push the lock button. The car locks itself and then it blinks its lights and beeps to let you know it's finished locking its doors. So this is the scenario, right? For example, whether you are locking or unlocking, what happens is, first thing is car will get locked or unlocked. In each scenario, you will also notice that the signal lights will blink. Also, you might get a small sound or an alarm kind of thing, right? That keek like that, something you get a noise like that. So these are the interactions going to happen between the car keys, and then as a person, we are the car owner, the person who is going to do that, right? So in a class diagram, let's capture all this in a class diagram. It shows the relationships among the car owner, car and car key classes, as well as some other concepts. Right. Let's see. So here is a class diagram for the scenario which we are discussing now. So if you look at these classes, there are three classes: car owner, car key, and car. Car owner has these attributes: name, date of birth, address, license number. Car owner has implemented these methods, drive and park. Let's keep these two for a side. I'll discuss that later. For the moment, keep in mind, this person can drive, this person can park. These are the functions he can do. If you look at a car key, he has an attribute called key ID number, basically showing, now normally in the car key there will be several buttons. Some car keys only have one button. So if you have more than one button, we will give a button number, or we call it key ID number. And this person implements a method called get button press by passing the button name. Okay. Looking at the car class, you have the car's own attributes like the make, whether the model, the year, tag number, etc. And it has process key message or process button message. It has a function where it accepts the parameter of the button name, locking, unlocking, and another one, opening the trunk. Right? So if you look at the car key, for the car key to be used, it exposes a button pad interface, and car owner will be interacting with the car key through the button pad. Then the car key will interact with the car through some kind of wireless connectivity, wireless connection. So we have learned earlier, this is a UML 2.0 sign for showing interfaces. Right? If you look at this one, you have two special type of classes basically. So we indicate it as signals. There are no special things in UML, so we just indicated signal, and it is shown as a dependency. That means the car is dependent on these two signals, blinking lights and beep. So these signals will kind of get activated through a command like it will be sending some information, sending some indicator to these classes. So that is what is shown here. And if you look at the car owner now car owner also needs to receive these signals somehow. So either the blinking light, or he has to understand blinking light, or he has to understand the beep. That's why we have added this also into the car owner class. But as you can notice, this doesn't show the behavior. We are trying to show the, as you see, the class diagram is only the static view, the fixed view. So it's very difficult to say that or show the behavior or the sequence behavior of how and when the car owner will receive these signals. So this is why we need a sequence diagram to understand the sequential nature of how and when these objects are interacting. Right? So let's go back to the explanation of this. The car owner processes a message from the key and causes the appropriate behavior to take place. So the car processes a message from the key and causes the appropriate behavior to take place. So car is going to finally process the, ultimately, when a car owner sends a message to car key sends a message to the car is going to process it and then signal back something. That is the basic scenario. Notice a couple of things about this diagram. In the car key class here, I've shown the signature of get button press. This operation works with a button name, either lock, unlock, or open trunk. Basically here in this parameter, or we call this, the whole thing is called signature. So in this parameter, we are going to pass either button name called lock, unlock, or open trunk. So based on that, it is going to pass that message again back to the car to do the relevant thing. The idea is that the car receives a message from the car key, processes that message, and implements the operation corresponding to the name of the pressed button. So what is going to happen is, when get button press is passing the message to the car, it is actually going to call the process key message with the relevant thing, lock or unlock. And within this one, it is going to either call lock, unlock, or open trunk based on the button name. Right. So the diagram also shows two signals, blink lights and beep. You model a signal as a class with the keyword signal as we showed here. The dependency arrows between car and each signal show that the car sends these signals. The car is sending some of these signals here. Right. The dependency arrows. Okay, so once again, the UML has no symbol for send. So you add the keyword send to the dependency arrow. Right. So to show something, we say these are dependent, but to say that this is going to send something, we don't have a special symbol in that. So simply to indicate that something is going to be sent, we just put a send tag here. Okay. Right. Finally, note that the car owner class shows something you haven't seen before in a class icon. The two occurrences of the signal keyword, as I mentioned. Normally we don't do this in a class diagram, but why we are trying to put this here is because we want to say something is going to be received. These things need to be received by the external thing. So that's what they're explaining here. These show you that car owner is capable of receiving these signals. The signals don't request the car owner to do anything because the car isn't making a request when it sends those signals. It certainly isn't waiting for the car owner to do anything. Hence, the sequence diagram uses the asynchronous message symbol to model signal. So why they're saying is, even though we have put this here, there is no way that car owner is going to ask for the blink lights or ask for the beep, and similarly, the other way around, right? This is just going to send, but this is not going to call the car owner to receive this. So for that point, what we do is we have to show some kind of a asynchronous message from the car to the car owner. From the car to the car owner, we need to send the signals. Then we can say that this interaction has taken place. Now that converting the class diagram into a sequence diagram. So the class diagram we discussed above, figure 9.5, is a static view of the little world of the car owner, car key, car, and the two signals. A sequence diagram provides a dynamic view. How? By showing the messages that pass from one of these entities to another. So start by drawing three objects like this. What we do is, this is how we begin. First, we have to identify what are our objects, and we arrange them in a logical layout left to right. So we first put the car on anonymous object, car anonymous object, and the car anonymous object, right? Because car owner is going to talk to the car. So that's why it makes sense we put the car owner at the beginning, right? You don't have to even show the car owner like this. You can even use a stick figure. Since it's a human entity, you can even show it as a stick figure. You know what is a stick figure, right? Something like this. Putting a person like this. This is also acceptable, especially if it's a human kind of a user, right? This is also accepted, or you can even show it in this way. It doesn't matter. Okay, so we first do that. So start by drawing three objects. One object is an instance of car, another is an instance of car key, and third is car. Lay them out across the top of the diagram and drop a lifeline from each one. So we just draw this. So here they are mentioning about what is anonymous object. I have explained that. Next, so once you first draw those three things, next add the arrows to model messages that go from lifeline to lifeline, as in figure 9.7. So as we see, the first message, the one highest in the vertical dimension, is a request from the car owner to the car key. So car owner is making a request to car key. You can see what is this type of message with this arrow. Can anybody tell quickly? Get button press or get key press. I think it is mentioned get key press in car key class. What type of message is being sent? Not synchronous, no? Asynchronous. Asynchronous. It is sending one way. One way message. Remember the arrowhead, right? So what Nashat mentioned is correct. So we are sending a message, not expecting anything from the car key. Basically, keep in mind, car owner is sending a message to car key whose method is get button press. Get button press is a method of car key. To go back to the class diagram, so I think it is mentioned in a different. See here, get button press is a function of car key. Car owner is just sending the command to the car key. He is not expecting anything from the car key to return. Keep that in mind. Because car owner is expecting something from the car only, not from the car key. So if you put a synchronous message here, that is dashed arrow, that means car key has to send something back to the car owner. Did you get that point? Logically, it makes sense, right? Car owner is just sending a message to car key and not expecting anything from the car key to return back. So he's simply calling the get button press message in the car key. Then car key starts activating, and now car key is sending a message to the car, which is a synchronous message. That means now car is expected to respond. When you indicate a dark arrow, a filled arrow like this as a synchronous message, if a message is coming from another object like that, then that particular object is expected to respond. That is the idea. So if you look at this, process key message is a method of who? It is a method of the car class. Here, look at this. Process key message is a method of the car class. So who is calling this message? Car key. And what type of message is that? Synchronous. Synchronous. It is sending a synchronous message. So when we send a synchronous message, now car has to respond. So it is responding in two ways. One is, so depending on the message. Now you have learned, now here it is calling itself using the lock method. Lock method is again a method of the car. So based on this B, value of B, you remember in state chart diagram, we learned something called within this square bracket. Can anybody remember what we call it? In state chart diagram, we learned something that when we send a message, we put something in square bracket. What is that? What condition? Remember condition? There's a name I taught for you. What condition do we call it? Anybody from the last? No idea. Okay. We remember we learned something called guard condition. Guard condition, meaning if this is the condition, this is the operation that takes place. So in this case, where the car is calling the lock function to itself, we assume the value of B is lock, and if it is locked, then it is going to call itself. If you look at this one, the next one here, we assume if the again, if the value of B is locked, so it is going to lock itself. Now after that, it is going to blink light. It's sending the signal, again asynchronous message to the car owner. That means when we say asynchronous, we are not expecting car owner to respond. After sending this, it is also sending another one, beep signal. Again, the condition is B should be a locked key. That means when the car owner is calling get button press with the value lock, this is what is going to happen. Right? So a simple success scenario is explained here. So we first started drawing the three objects in the logical order. Then the very first operation that takes place is car owner calling the car key using a asynchronous message. So when I told when you're sending asynchronous, you're not expected to see a response from that object back to the owner. So here car owner is the sender, car key is the receiver. So in this, since this is asynchronous, the receiver doesn't have to send anything back to the sender. Then car key and car, now car key is the sender, car is the receiver. He is sending a synchronous message where the receiver needs to respond back. So it can respond maybe to the car key, doesn't make any sense. Car talking back to the car keys makes no sense. So you can see it is talking back to the car owner and sending a asynchronous message with the relevant guard conditions, right? So guard conditions are optional. If you don't have any condition, you simply just can mention only the message name. Okay. So the scenario explained. The first message, the one highest in the vertical dimension, is a request from the car owner to the car key. The request is for car key to implement its get key press operation. So they mistakenly typed it get button press actually. Both are same. Get button press operation. Registering the button the car owner has pressed, generally referred to as B. The stick arrowhead indicates the car owner is transferring control to car key. Car key then sends a message to car calling on car to implement its process key message operation depending on the specified button. After it processes the message from car key, car sends itself a message to implement the operation that corresponds to the pressed button, right? Itself. One thing is happening. So generally this is a normal scenario, no? When you're locking a vehicle, so it will lock itself and then send the signals back. All happen at the same time. So here we can't say same time in a sequence. Basically, we have to put it in an order, right? This is happening, then this will happen, then this will happen, something like that. That will give an idea. Note the expression in brackets. That's the guard condition we learned, right? So if the pressed button was lock, the car sends itself a request to carry out the lock operation. Then car sends its two signals to the car owner. So the first message and the signals are examples of the two usages of the stick arrowhead. So this example shows one use of a sequence diagram, modeling the interactions in a domain defined by a class diagram. Okay, so that was one of the simplest of examples. Okay, let's move on to another example. Soda machine. I think this we discussed very earlier when we were discussing the class diagrams or use case diagram. I will revisit that example briefly here. Let's move on to an example with a little more complexity. You'll recall that in previous ones you read about the use cases of a soda machine. You know about the soda machine, you might have seen in big malls, sometimes in foreign countries also. You might have seen like people can put the money, the coins, they can select the soda and that will dispense the relevant soda can and you can just pick it up, right? It's a small machine, just like working with an ATM. So instead of ATM has money, this will have soda cans, right? So the sequence diagram is useful for modeling the scenarios of a use case. In this example, you will model scenarios of the buy soda use case. So there could be many things in that use case. We are going to consider only one use case called buy soda, and then we are going to draw the sequence diagram for it. So I would say sequence diagram and diagrams because there could be many sub scenarios out of this. Okay. So you will begin with a class diagram as you did in the preceding example. The class diagram will model the entities that make up a soda machine. To keep it simple, assume three components are involved in this use case: a front, a register, and a dispenser. Engineers who make a living designing and building soda machines can have different idea of the number of components, but here we are just going to focus on these three, assuming this a front, a register, and a dispenser is going to be part of the soda machine. Okay, soda machine scenario. So in your model of the soda machine, the front, so we have this part called one object called front, which is responsible for these operations, accepting the selections made by the user and accepting the cache. It will display some messages like out of selection, and or maybe it will instruct use the correct change. Correct change means correct money. For example, you may put the wrong amount of money or insufficient money into the system, so it may give a different message based on that. Or it will receive changes from the register and make it available to the customer. So it will talk to the register, the second object, and maybe so register is the part going to handle the money things. So it will maybe, let's say you have put more money, so it has to give you the balance. So that's what this third point is saying. And finally, it should also do a functionality of returning any cash, and also receives a can of soda from the dispenser. From the third object, this front needs to return the soda and make it available for the customer. So these are the operations that will happen in the front component of the soda machine. Register gets the customer's input from the front. It will update its cash reserve, checks for change. Then the third object, dispenser, checks the availability of a selection and releases a can of soda. Okay. So these are the three objects and their relevant operations. Now putting this into a class diagram, we can show it as an aggregate of this. You have learned what is aggregation. So when we say soda machine, it consists of these three objects: the front, the register, the dispenser. So the different operations we are discussing here. So front, as we discussed here, all these 5 operations are mentioned as 5 methods here. So it's going to accept, receive soda, receive change, return cash, display prompt. If you take register, get customer input, update reserve, check for change. Dispenser, check availability, release soda. So simply you draw a class diagram. First of all, you might have already done this when you're doing class diagram as part of the order you did from the requirements description. You might have drawn this. Once you have this class diagram only, it will be easy to now start drawing the sequence diagram. So without a class diagram, keep in mind, it is going to be very difficult to draw a sequence diagram, right? So keep that as an important point. So let's model the best case scenario of the buy soda use case. Best case means, as I told earlier, success scenario. Everything perfectly working. How do you draw the sequence diagram for that? So the best case scenario for the buy soda use case would be customer inserts the correct change, that means the correct money, and the customer selection is available. So the sequence will go like this. The customer inserts the money into the money slot in the front of the machine and makes a selection of the soda. The money travels to the register, which updates itself. Because this is the best case scenario, an availability check reveals that the soda is in stock. Whatever he has selected, that soda is available. So the register has the dispenser release the soda to the front of the machine. So to show this success scenario, we can show it somewhat like this. So you have all the objects interacting. So this front, register, and dispenser is part of the soda. As you can see, the external entity, the customer, is also another object who is going, because without this person, who is going to start the work? So that's why we have shown the customer. So customer is calling a method of the front called accept. As we saw in this diagram here, accept is a method in the front class. So customer is sending a synchronous message in this case. So he is expecting something where the front wants to return something, right? Then in turn, this is activated, starting to activate. Then front is calling a method from the register class, which is get customer input. So it's again passing these two parameters, the cache and selection. Then register gets activated and sends again a synchronous message to the dispenser, calling the check availability function of the dispenser. Now, since you can see from register to dispenser, we'll come back to the other ones later. Register to dispenser, synchronous message is there. And since this is a success scenario, it is sending a message that, okay, the made selection, say soda, let's say it's Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Mirinda, whatever he has selected, let's say he's selected Mirinda. So dispenser says that is available, sends a message back to register. So the corresponding this for this one is complete. Then keeps on going. You can see up to this point, no activity. Now this one is updating itself, updating the reserve. It's calling its method because now the money has come in. So it needs to keep the money. So update reserve is trying to keep the money properly or something, right? So it's calling itself. Then again, you can see it is verifying, maybe a part of update reserve, it is verifying whether the correct amount is made, because now first part is basically just checking whether soda is available. But now this part, as part of update reserve, it is going to also check internally that whether the money entered is sufficient for the soda's price. So if that is successful, then again it sends a asynchronous message indicating to the dispenser to release something. Then dispenser is calling, it is sending a message or calling the receive soda method of the front. So once that is there, the soda is not available. So here I told you return messages are optional. You can show, you cannot show. In this case, we can take it. So we cannot show it as part of the system functionality like take or receive soda, something like that for the customer. Basically, this indicates at this point the sequence, the success scenario is completed. Any questions on this diagram? Do you go? So we drew this flow for the success scenario. Person comes with the money and the selection, right? So this is just one scenario in this use case. In another scenario, the customer's selection might be sold out. That means now he has the money, correct amount of money, but the soda he's selecting is not available, whatever he's preferred. So how do you model that in the sequence diagram? So this one shows a diagram that models the sold out scenario. So again, you can see customer calling the front with the accept method. Register, front is calling the register using the get customer input. Synchronous message. And again, he is calling whether it is available. Now dispenser is telling the response, it is sold out. So if it is sold out, no need to update the register again, no, like the previous thing. If it is sold out, no point keeping the money. So it is calling the return cache function of the front object with the cache, and also it is calling the display prompt with the message called sold out. So those two methods were there: display prompt and return cache. See, so register is calling back these two methods. So you can see now who is interacting with whom very easily, right? So at this point, the sequence is complete for the buy soda use case sold out scenario. Buy soda use case sold out scenario. Right. Let's say another scenario. Here's another scenario. Suppose the customer doesn't insert the correct amount of change. Right. Now soda is available. Everything is there. but the money he is putting is not enough. He's not putting the correct amount, right? So how do you show that one? Finally, suppose the customer does not insert the correct change and the soda machine is out of change. The sequence diagram for that scenario. There can be multiple things here as well. I mean, there could be one more case here. He may even put the correct change, and now sometimes in the register, cash register, there might be not enough money to give a balance. That is also possible, because normally in that box, if enough money is not there to give the balance, that is also another problem. So here we'll take it much more simpler. In one case, person is not inserting the correct amount. Okay, so what happens? Same flow, accept, get customer input, check availability, and dispenser is returning a message. Okay, soda is available. Now register is checking for change and then updating the so it is updating the reserve and then maybe sending the so it is releasing the soda. It's asking to release the soda and then receiving the soda and also receiving the change. But here is a problem. So it's calling back to receive the change. Okay, so receive is a method of the front, and we don't have a way to show. In this case, we don't have a way to say this is a unsuccessful one, because we simply call the method receive change. So as part of the receive change, there could be a message, I believe. So let's say it's calling receive change here. Maybe we have to send a display prompt saying the change is not enough or something like that. I think they haven't shown that here. So sequence diagram for the incorrect change scenario. Okay, let's see. Sequence diagram for the incorrect change and machine is out of change scenario. Okay, so this could be for the incorrect change scenario. Here we are mixing both. Incorrect change is also there, and also machine doesn't have money to give the balance back. So in this case, same thing is shown. Get customer input, check for change. So we don't talk back to the dispenser. So we just check for the change and return the cash and return it with the message, okay, please use the correct amount. So what they are trying to say here is we could have avoided some of these extra steps in this case. So we have to decide which one is going to call first. If we had already gone to availability before checking the cash, we have kind of spent a lot of work here. These interactions might not be needed if we had checked the cash at the first place and checked for the balance and everything at the first place. Then this side of the operations was not needed. So I think that's why they have compared this. So if we did this one, see, no need to even talk to the dispenser. If you don't have the proper change and if you don't have the balance to return, you don't even have to talk to the dispenser, right? So these are some practical scenarios you will face when you start drawing the sequence diagram for the different scenarios. You will have to decide. So this is what makes a programmer to either keep on writing lines of code or wherever they could avoid unnecessary lines of code. That depends on the design. So this is why system design is very important, right? As you can see, as you can feel from these things we are discussing, these system matters. System design matters a lot to the developers or the development team. Okay, so I'll stop at this class, and I assume you go through these things. In the next class, we'll discuss further how do we combine all these different scenarios into a generic sequence diagram, right? So all these times we were discussing about single instances. For each scenario, we draw a separate sequence diagram and try to understand. But in a general sequence diagram, how do we do it? And when we are drawing general sequence diagram, we will come up with many more complicated scenarios. And how do we show those complicated scenarios with different notations? So that is something we'll discuss in the next class. Any questions up to now? You can ask if there are any questions. So I hope it's not a very complicated thing to sequence diagram is not very difficult. Just like how state diagram was very simple to understand, some simple cases are only here. Only thing you have to keep in mind is how to make use of the different message types. So when you are using synchronous, definitely that, so when a sender is sending a synchronous message to a receiver, the receiver has to respond. When a sender is sending a asynchronous message, receiver, it's just one way. There is no expectation. So sender doesn't expect anything in return. That is what is called asynchronous, right? And the dashed arrow is to indicate optional return values, return messages, things like that. Right? And also you can see sequence diagram also gives the idea who is talking to each other. So from here, in any case, customer is not going to talk to the dispenser. Customer is not going to talk to the register, right? So all are happening through the operations of other objects. Right? Another point to note is, if you want to draw a sequence diagram, you should have a proper class diagram with all the functions defined. Right? So that's all.